History 2323 The Progressive Era. The Progressive Era begins with this magazine by Samuel McClure, in which the reporters begin to investigate and expose corruption or other issues and makes them public, and so that reform or change will happen. Some of these reporters I mentioned here, Lincoln Steffens, he exposed corruption in city government in both St. Louis and Minneapolis. And Ida Tarbell, one of her targets was Standard Oil. She wrote the history of Standard Oil to help break that up. This movement is sometimes called the political response to the Great Transformation from Lecture 1, when you have the results of industrialization, urbanization, and immigration. Also, this movement, you have to have certain groups that are part of a reform movement in order for it to be effective. And this one had all the ingredients to accomplish that. The middle class was on board, the working class, consumers were on board, Western reformers were on board, and businessmen, which sounds a little odd, the last one, because big business was a target. But remember, big business also swallows small business. And these businessmen may have just wanted a fair playing field to do business on, so that they could compete. Or the other issue could be that if you know that reform is coming and you're in business, you want to kind of get involved so that you can help control, shape that reform. So progressives defined, for the most part, progressives had held these beliefs. They believed in progress. They tend to be optimistic. They were from the Midwest, often small town roots. They were very pragmatic. In other words, they weren't, if one method or one reform failed, they just try another one. They tended to be young. They tended to be Protestants. They tended to be evangelicals. They tended to be pro-government, in that government would help solve some of these problems that all these changes from the Gilded Age had produced. So I look at the Progressive Era through 4 stages, and the first one is a private or an individual stage. And these are basically, now muckrakers, there it is, the term that Teddy Roosevelt will use for journalists with a social agenda. So they're like investigative reporters today. So their reform agenda is all over the place here. So Lincoln Steffens, I jotted down a book, if there was a book associated with the muckraker, and his was city government corruption. Sprague was child labor. Reese was tenements. Tarbell was Standard Oil. Hine was taking pictures of children working. Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, which some of you may have read in high school, is about the filth in meatpacking plants. Nast was a cartoonist who helped bring down Boss Tweed, that corrupt mayor. You also get into the social sciences here, where you start collecting scientific data to solve social problems, and Lawrence Wheeler would be an example of that. Women's issues, these sweatshops were very dangerous. Women were paid less. The conditions were sometimes worse than in other factories. And that Triangle Shirtwaist factory had a fire, I think it's in 1911 or 13, sometime in there, where 140 some women jumped out of the building to their deaths because the exits were all locked, because some had been slipping out during their break and not coming back to work. So that led to reforms. Also, Muller versus Oregon, or Mueller it might be pronounced. This is going to be a case where women's work days actually shorten in certain industries. Women getting the right to vote. That woman, you should know, Carrie Chapman Catt, will carry the mantle for women's right to vote over the finish line in 1920 with the 19th Amendment. So what began in 1848 at Seneca Falls, which you may have touched on in 2313, History 2313, will be complete at this point. Temperance, that means getting rid of alcohol. There's 2 women you should know here, Nation and Willard. Their groups, Women Christian Temperance Union for Willard, are trying to get rid of alcohol, thinking that's going to help make family stronger, and men won't blow their paycheck on the way home Friday night from work at the bar rather than spending it on their family. The social gospel, this is looking for scripture principles to apply to society to improve society. So Gladden and Rauschenbusch. Settlement houses, this is Jane Addams and the Hull House. There'll be about 400 of them eventually. And they're transition stations for these new immigrants. So they would learn, the basics of English, how to apply for a job, basic sanitation, things of that sort. Get them in their transition period into their new country. And then civil rights, you've got two leaders here, Booker T and W.E.B. Both are aiming for the same goal, full equality for African Americans. They're just going to go two different ways. One's going to be more accommodating, that we will earn it through having our students from Tuskegee, which is going to be Washington, be as able, capable, fully qualified to do jobs as anyone else, as good as anyone else can. And then the boys will be more of the confrontational through the courts, through the NAACP, and they're going to be led by the talented 10th. At the top of the leaders would be the ones who would pave the way for the others to follow. So you can see the private stage is quite a few topics there. The local stage will be mayors, and the hurricane actually in Galveston is going to help pave the way for reform of city governments at the mayor level. The two best mayors in the country were in Toledo and Cleveland, Ohio. And you can see their names there. Third stage is the governors, and the one I want you to know best is La Follette from Wisconsin. These are all going to be progressive governors, and you can see Woodrow Wilson's in there. He will eventually become a progressive Democrat president. And they're going to be, both parties have these progressives, because Hughes runs as a Republican later in 1916, and Wilson's going to be a Democrat president. And then the fourth stage is the presidential stage, the national stage. And there's two Republican presidents, Teddy Roosevelt and Taft, and then the 1912 Wilson will win and become the first Democrat. TR sets a huge agenda for his presidency. So he's into trust busting. He'll be the first one to break up monopolies, 44 of them. Prior to this, when you read about those strikes that we talked about earlier, you'll see that the federal government often sides with management rather than with the worker. And TR will change that with the coal miner strike of 1902. So he will begin to give workers a fair shake, and that's where he gets that square deal slogan attached to his presidency. He's into conservation. He's also into consumer protection for food, medicine, ingredients. You'll see lots of legislation go through for that. He talks directly to the American people, and it's called the bully pulpit. Every president's got that power now, but he begins it. He will win easily in 1904, but he gets bored with the presidency and will choose Taft to replace him. Taft will become the second progressive president, second Republican progressive president. However, he has his Secretary of the Interior, Ballinger, and Taft's good friend, who was chief of the forestry, Pinchot, will have a controversy, and that will lead to ultimately TR coming back into politics in 1912, but not as a Republican. He's going to come in as an independent of Bull Moose Party. So there's Taft as the incumbent in 1912. That's who had won in 1908. Wilson's the Dem. TR is the Bull Moose Party, Progressive Party, and Debs is the Socialist Party, Eugene Debs. TR's plan is called New Nationalism. Wilson's is called New Freedom. They both just view how business, labor, and government, the three big powers, are going to be able to work together to, take out monopolies and to clean up corruption, etc. Wilson's agenda is quite extensive. He passes the Federal Reserve System, that FRS, which creates the Federal Reserve Bank, and it's got 12 branches. It is still going to be in existence. The chairman of that is very powerful when it comes to the economy. He strengthens the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890 with the Clayton Antitrust Act of 1913 or 14. The Federal Trade Commission, Child Labor Act, but we still don't have federal child labor laws until we get to the 1930s. Federal Farmers Act, and then an 8-hour workday for railroad workers. So all these are going to be part of the progressive agenda and ultimately part of the progressive legacy. This concludes lecture 10 for History 2323.